What happens when a man's greatest triumph becomes the stage for his epic downfall? For Michael Petrov, his promotion party held on a glittering Manhattan rooftop was meant to be his coronation. He was the king of his universe, and he had everything. The 7-figure bonus, the corner office, and a beautiful woman by his side. The only problem: the woman wasn't his wife. He brought his mistress to the celebration, intending to finalize the humiliating discard of his quiet, unassuming wife, Clara. But he never imagined that the most powerful man in the room, his own boss, held a secret that would turn the night of his victory into a spectacle of his own ruin and his wife's unexpected ascension. This is the story of what happens when a woman underestimated is finally seen. The air in their Park Avenue apartment was always the same cool still, and smelling faintly of lemongrass and money. It was an expensive, curated scent, just like everything else in Michael Petrov's life. On this particular Tuesday, the stillness was charged with an almost unbearable tension. Michael was a man on the precipice of his own coronation. Tonight, Sterling Crest Capital. The investment firm where he had sacrificed his youth, his morals, and nearly a decade of his life was officially announcing his promotion to Senior Vice President of Acquisitions. He stood before the full-length antique gold mirror in their master bedroom, adjusting the knot of his Tom Ford tie. It was a deep charcoal silk that perfectly matched the pinstripes of his bespoke suit. Every detail had to be perfect. Perfection was the language of power, and tonight he was fluent. "Clara, have you seen my cufflinks? The onyx ones?" He called out, his voice impatient. He didn't turn to look for her. He expected her to materialize as she always did with the requested item in hand. Clara Petrov appeared in the reflection of his mirror. She was holding the small, velvet-lined box. She was already dressed for the evening, but her choice of attire was, in his opinion, tragically predictable. A navy blue sheath dress. It was elegant, well-made, and utterly forgettable. It was a dress chosen not to be noticed, a perfect reflection of the woman she had become. "Here they are," she said, her voice quiet. It was a voice he rarely listened to anymore. It was background noise like the hum of the sub-zero refrigerator or the distant Manhattan traffic. He took the box from her without a word of thanks, his fingers deftly plucking the cufflinks and securing them to his cuffs. His reflection smirked back at him. A man of 38, with sharp Slavic features, piercing blue eyes and dark hair, already showing distinguished flecks of silver at the temples. He looked every bit the master of the universe he was about to become. His eyes met hers in the mirror. For a fleeting second, he saw the woman he had married 12 years ago. The bright, witty law student with a fiery passion for justice and a laugh that could fill a room. Now her hazel eyes were clouded with a permanent weariness. Her face, still lovely, was etched with faint lines of disappointment he refused to acknowledge were his own creation. She had, he reasoned, simply let herself go. She'd traded ambition for PTA meetings and legal briefs for grocery lists. It was her choice. "Is that what you're wearing?" he asked, the criticism barely veiled. Clara's hands smoothed down the front of the dress. "What's wrong with it?" "Nothing, it's fine." He said the word fine, landing like an insult. "It's just tonight is a big night, Clara. It's the culmination of everything. I want you to shine with me." "What you want," she thought, "is for your accessory to match your suit." She said nothing. Arguing was a waste of breath, an expenditure of energy she could no longer afford. She had been saving her energy for other things lately. "The car is downstairs," he announced, checking his Patek Philippe watch. "We can't be late. David Sterling himself is hosting this. Punctuality is respect." David Sterling, the founder and CEO of the firm. A legend on Wall Street, a man whose approval Michael craved with a hunger that bordered on obsession. To be recognized by Sterling was to be anointed. As they rode the silent elevator down 30 floors, the tension stretched between them thin and sharp as a razor wire. Michael was scrolling through his phone, a small, self-satisfied smile playing on his lips. Clara watched the floor numbers descend, feeling a familiar knot of dread tighten in her stomach. She knew what tonight was really about. It wasn't just a celebration of his success. It was a public execution of their marriage. For the past 6 months, Michael had been careless. Or perhaps more accurately, he had stopped caring enough to be careful. There were the late nights that smelled of a different perfume. The hushed phone calls he'd walk into another room to take the credit card statements with charges for hotel bars and restaurants she'd never been to. And then there was Isabella. Isabella Rossi, a junior analyst in his department. Young, raven-haired, with an unbridled ambition that mirrored his own. Clara had seen her by accident once when she'd dropped by his office to bring him a forgotten document. The way Isabella had looked at Michael with a potent cocktail of professional admiration and personal adoration was unmistakable. The way Michael had looked back at her with a possessive fire Clara hadn't seen directed at her in years had told her everything she needed to know. He had become a cliché. The powerful man trading in his loyal wife for a newer model. The thought was so banal it was almost laughable, yet the pain of it was a physical ache in her chest. "I need you to be on your best behavior tonight," Michael said. Suddenly, his eyes still glued to his phone. "Engage with people, smile, look proud. My success is your success after all." The sheer audacity of that statement nearly made her gasp. His success. He had long forgotten the years she'd worked 2 jobs to support them while he finished his MBA. He'd forgotten how she'd proofread every proposal coached him through every interview and managed their entire life so he could focus solely on his climb up the corporate ladder. She had been the unseen architect of his ascent. Now she was just part of the foundation, buried and forgotten. "I know how to behave at a party, Michael," she replied, her voice dangerously level. The car, a sleek black Mercedes, pulled up to the curb in front of The Apex, a hyper-exclusive private club on the 60th floor of a new skyscraper in the financial district. The views were said to be breathtaking. Clara felt a cold certainty that tonight she was going to be pushed off the edge. As the doorman opened her door, Michael leaned over his voice, a low, menacing whisper. "Don't embarrass me, Clara. Not tonight." She got out of the car and looked up at the glittering tower, a modern-day Babel reaching for the heavens. It felt like the perfect place for a man's pride to come before a fall. She just never imagined it would be his and not hers. She took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and walked into the lion's den. The elevator ride to the Apex was a silent, stomach-lurching ascent. As the doors slid open, they were met with a wave of sound, the sophisticated hum of conversation, the clinking of crystal glasses, and the smooth strains of a live jazz trio. The room was spectacular, a panorama of glass walls offering a 360-degree view of the glittering Manhattan skyline at dusk. The city lights twinkled below like a carpet of fallen stars. It was a view designed to make one feel powerful on top of the world. For Clara, it just made her feel very, very small. Michael was instantly in his element. He transformed. The sullen, critical husband from the car vanished, replaced by a charismatic, back-slapping titan in the making. He navigated the room with the practiced ease of a shark, shaking hands, laughing at the right moments, his arm resting possessively on the small of Clara's back. She was the prop, the physical proof of his stable, respectable life. "There he is, the man of the hour," a colleague boomed, slapping Michael on the shoulder. "James, good to see you." Michael beamed. "You know my wife, Clara." James gave her a cursory glance and a limp handshake. "Of course. Eleanor, lovely to see you." "It's Clara," she corrected him, her voice barely registering over the din. It didn't matter. He had already turned back to Michael, launching into a discussion about market volatility. She was invisible again. She endured an hour of this, smiling politely, as Michael introduced her to a parade of men with names like Robert Richard and Paul, and women with surgically perfected faces and jewel-toned dresses. They all looked through her, their eyes flicking to Michael, the real center of gravity. They'd ask her what she did, and when she replied that she was a data analyst for a philanthropic foundation, their interest would visibly dim. It wasn't finance. It wasn't high fashion. It wasn't relevant. She clutched a glass of sparkling water, the ice cubes a cold anchor in her clammy hand. She watched her husband, this man she had built a life with, soak in the adulation like a dying plant, finally getting water. He was glowing, and she knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that he believed he no longer needed her to tend his roots. And then she saw her. Isabella Rossi made her entrance not with a bang, but with a deliberate, magnetic grace. She wore a crimson dress that clung to her toned figure like a second skin. It was a bold, unapologetic slash of color in a room of muted charcoals and navies. Her dark hair was styled in sleek waves, and her smile was dazzling. She wasn't just there. She was making a statement. She was the future. She walked directly toward their group. Not with the hesitation of a junior employee approaching a senior executive, but with the confidence of an invited guest and equal. Clara's heart began to hammer against her ribs. This was it. The moment she had been dreading. "Michael." Isabella purred, her voice a low, husky thing that was perfectly engineered to captivate. "I hope I'm not late." Michael turned, and the brilliant artificial smile he had been wearing all night transformed into something genuine, something electric. It was the smile Clara hadn't seen in a decade. "Isabella, you're right on time," he said, his voice dropping to a more intimate register. He didn't just look at her, he devoured her with his eyes. "Everyone," he said, turning back to the small circle of managing directors he'd been holding court with. "I'd like you to meet Isabella Rossi. She's one of the brightest stars in our acquisitions department. Truly, the future of this company." The praise was extravagant, almost unprofessional. But it was the way he did it, with his body angled towards Isabella, his hand having left Clara's back, to gesture expansively toward the younger woman that was the first deep cut. He didn't introduce Clara. He simply let her stand there, a silent, awkward appendage to the vibrant scene he was creating, with Isabella at its center. The men who had barely given Clara a second glance were now fully focused on Isabella, their eyes alight with a mixture of professional assessment and masculine appreciation. She was one of them, a player. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. The room seemed to tilt slightly, the buzz of conversation fading into a dull roar in her ears. She wanted to run. She wanted to scream. She wanted to throw her glass of water in his smug, triumphant face. But she was paralyzed, frozen in a tableau of public humiliation. Isabella, for her part, played her role to perfection. She was deferential enough to the senior partners, yet sparkling with a confidence that made Michael's praise seem justified. She then turned her gaze to Clara, a flicker of something, was it pity triumph, in her dark eyes. "And you must be Clara," Isabella said, extending a perfectly manicured hand. Her voice was sweet, laced with poison. "Michael has told me so little about you." It was a masterfully delivered line. It wasn't just an insult. It was a declaration. It established her intimacy with Michael, while simultaneously erasing Clara's entire existence. Clara felt the collective gaze of the group shift to her, waiting for her reaction. She could feel their morbid curiosity. She looked at Michael, pleading with her eyes for him to say something to fix this, to defend her honor. But he was looking at Isabella, a proud, proprietary smile on his face. He was enjoying this. This was part of the show, the shedding of the old skin. Her paralysis broke. A cold, sharp clarity washed over her. She would not give them the satisfaction of a scene. She would not cry. She would not be the hysterical wife. Taking a slow, deliberate breath, she looked directly at Isabella, ignoring the offered hand. "That's understandable," Clara said, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the small pocket of silence. "He rarely discusses his work with me. I'm sure he finds my own career far too dull to merit conversation." It was a small act of defiance, but it was hers. She saw a flash of surprise on Isabella's face and a flicker of annoyance on Michael's. Before anyone could respond, Clara gave a tight, polite smile. "If you'll excuse me," she said to the group at large, "I need to find the powder room." She turned and walked away, her back straight, her head held high. She didn't run. She walked with a measured pace, each step an act of will. She could feel their eyes on her back. She didn't know where the powder room was, but she kept walking past the bar, past clusters of laughing guests toward a corridor at the far end of the room. She didn't look back to see Michael place a reassuring hand on Isabella's arm, pulling her closer into the circle, seamlessly filling the space where his wife had just been. She didn't need to. She could feel it. The cut had been made clean and deep, and he was just getting started. Clara found the restrooms down a marble-clad corridor, the silence a welcome respite from the cacophony of the party. She pushed the heavy door open and walked into an opulent space of white granite and gleaming chrome. She was alone, leaning against a cool marble countertop. She stared at her reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back was pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and a strange, nascent anger. She had two choices. She could slip out the service exit, call a cab, and go home to the empty, silent apartment. She could pack a bag and leave, disappearing from his life before he had the chance to deliver the final killing blow. It was the sensible option, the self-preservation option. Or she could go back out there. She could face it. She could force him to look at her, to acknowledge what he was doing in the full glare of his triumph. Why? She wasn't entirely sure. A flicker of the fiery law student she used to be, perhaps. The one who never backed down from a fight. She had poured 12 years of her life into that man. She had built the scaffolding that allowed him to reach these heights. She would not be swept away like rubble in the night. She would bear witness to her own erasure. Taking a deep breath, she reapplied her lipstick with a steady hand. The simple act felt like putting on armor. She smoothed her forgettable navy dress, and for the first time she was glad of it. It was her camouflage. They wouldn't see her coming. She walked back out into the fray. The party had reached its crescendo. A small temporary stage had been set up near the panoramic window, and the jazz trio had fallen silent. A senior partner was at the microphone, warming up the crowd. Clara slipped into the back of the room, finding a spot near a pillar where she could see without being easily seen. Michael and Isabella were standing near the front, side by side. Not quite touching, but the space between them was electric, a private world in a crowded room. Michael was laughing, basking in the attention. He was utterly blissfully unaware that she had returned. After a few preliminary speeches, the moment arrived. David Sterling himself walked onto the stage. The room fell into a respectful hush. Sterling was in his late 60s, with a mane of thick white hair, a trim physique, and an aura of quiet, unquestionable authority. He commanded respect not through volume, but through presence. "Good evening," he began, his voice calm and resonant. "It's wonderful to see so many brilliant minds gathered here tonight. We are here to celebrate success, to acknowledge the hard work and dedication that drives Sterling Crest Capital forward." He spoke for a few minutes about the firm's quarterly performance, his words precise and impactful. Clara watched Michael. He was puffed up with pride, his chest practically straining against the buttons of his suit. He was ready for his anointing. "And that brings me to the main event." Sterling continued, a warm smile on his face. "Tonight we honor a man who has shown exceptional drive and a killer instinct for acquisitions. His work on the recent Omnicorp merger was nothing short of brilliant. It is my great pleasure to officially announce the promotion of Michael Petrov to Senior Vice President." The room erupted in applause. Michael stepped forward, shaking Sterling's hand, firmly accepting the metaphorical crown. He practically swaggered to the microphone as Sterling stepped aside. He gave a speech that was a masterclass in false humility. He thanked the board, his team, and the senior partners. He spoke of synergy and disruption and shareholder value. He was charming, witty, and utterly self-congratulatory. Then at the very end he said, "And of course I have to thank my wonderful wife Clara. Her support has been invaluable." He scanned the crowd vaguely, not really looking for her, assuming she was either gone or somewhere in the back. The words were an afterthought. A box ticked. The crowd gave a polite, perfunctory smattering of applause for the little woman at home. He then made his fatal error. High on his own success, feeling invincible, he looked toward Isabella. "But I also have to acknowledge the new generation of talent that inspires me every day," he said, his voice full of meaning. "People like Isabella Rossi. Her energy and insight on the Omnicorp deal were a game changer. She is the future, and I am thrilled to be a part of it." He raised his glass in Isabella's direction. It was a brazen public declaration, a torch being passed. In that moment, he wasn't just introducing a mistress. He was announcing his choice, his future. The implication was clear to everyone in the room who knew the dynamics of power and ambition. Clara's stomach clenched. The final humiliation. Michael stepped down from the stage, triumphant, and walked straight to Isabella's side. The applause died down, and people began to murmur the gossip starting to ripple through the room like a virus. But then a voice cut through the noise. "If I may have one more moment," David Sterling said, stepping back to the microphone. The room fell silent again, surprised. Sterling waited for every eye to be on him. He held his champagne flute in his hand. He wasn't looking at Michael. He was scanning the crowd. His eyes swept the room past the partners, past the new star Isabella, and landed with unnerving precision directly on Clara, half hidden by the pillar. Their eyes met across the crowded room. She saw a flicker of recognition and something else. Respect. Michael is right to celebrate success, Sterling began, his voice even. But I find myself compelled to speak about another, perhaps quieter but no less monumental success story within the Petrov family. A confused murmur went through the crowd. Michael, standing with Isabella, froze. His smile faltered. He looked from Sterling to Clara, a dawning horror on his face. Most of you here measure success in quarterly earnings and market share. Sterling continued, his voice gaining power. It's a valid metric. But there are other metrics. There are other bottom lines. Some of you may know that I sit on the board of the Global Health and Welfare Foundation. He paused, letting that sink in. This was a prestigious heavyweight philanthropic organization known for its cutting-edge data-driven approach to solving global health crises. This year, Sterling said, his eyes still locked on Clara. The foundation was struggling with a massive data set concerning pediatric malnutrition in sub-Saharan Africa. We had millions of data points, but we were failing to see the crucial correlations that would allow us to distribute aid effectively. We were losing time, resources, and frankly, lives. The room was now dead silent. The party had stopped. This was something else entirely. Then an analyst on their small team, a woman who was told the problem was likely unsolvable, developed a new predictive model. She created an algorithm so revolutionary, so insightful that it didn't just find the correlations we were looking for. It identified underlying causal factors we had never even considered. Sterling raised his glass higher. His voice resonated with genuine admiration. That analyst's model has, in the last 6 months, increased the efficiency of our aid distribution by over 400%. It is projected to save the lives of an estimated 20,000 children in the next year alone. The paper she authored on the methodology is set to be published in The Lancet. He let the name of the world's most prestigious medical journal hang in the air. Then he smiled a genuine admiring smile directly at Clara. That analyst's name, he declared to the silent, stunned room, is Clara Petrov. He turned his body fully towards her, a public and undeniable gesture of recognition. So while I congratulate Michael on his promotion, David Sterling concluded, his voice ringing with authority, I would like to propose a different toast to the woman whose quiet brilliance and dedication will save thousands of lives and change the world in a way a corporate merger never can. To Clara. He raised his glass. For a moment there was stunned silence. Then one by one, then in a flood, the people in the room, the real power players who understood the magnitude of what Sterling had just described, turned toward Clara. They raised their glasses. The sound of applause that followed was not the polite, perfunctory clap for a corporate drone. It was a roar. It was a standing ovation. For Clara Petrov. Michael stood ashen-faced, his glass frozen halfway to his lips. His own triumph had been utterly and completely eclipsed. He had been rendered a footnote at his own party. He stared at his wife, this quiet, forgettable woman in the navy dress who was now the center of the universe. He didn't see the woman he had dismissed. He saw a stranger, a giant whose shadow had just blotted out his son. And in that moment, Clara stood a little taller. The applause washed over her, not as noise, but as validation. She met David Sterling's gaze and gave a small, grateful nod. Then she looked at her husband, her eyes clear and cold as ice. The power in the room had shifted. The game had changed, and she had just been handed all the best cards. The applause for Clara eventually subsided, but the atmosphere in the room was irrevocably changed. The carefully constructed hierarchy of the evening had been demolished. The magnetic pole of the party was no longer Michael, the newly minted SVP, but Clara, the quiet genius no one had known existed. It was like a switch had been flipped. People who had looked through her an hour ago were now actively seeking her out. A senior partner's wife, a formidable woman dripping in diamonds, whom Clara had mentally nicknamed Ms. Botox, suddenly appeared at her side. "Clara, my dear, that is simply incredible." She gushed her grip on Clara's arm, surprisingly strong. "David Sterling almost never speaks like that about anyone. You must tell me everything." Before Clara could formulate a response, James, the colleague, who had called her Eleanor, pushed his way forward. "Clara, I am so sorry. I had no idea. Absolutely fascinating work. We must talk. My wife's sister works in global health policy." They flocked to her, a murmuring, curious tide. They were drawn not to her, the person, but to her success, to the reflected glow of David Sterling's endorsement. It was a currency they all understood. For the first time all night, she was relevant. She handled the sudden onslaught with a calm she didn't know she possessed. She answered their questions politely, but vaguely deflecting the more intrusive ones with practiced ease. The years of navigating passive-aggressive PTA meetings and vapid social functions had, it turned out, been an excellent training ground. Across the room, she could see Michael. He was trapped in a social no-man's land. People were avoiding him. Their gazes would flick toward him, full of pity or scorn, before quickly looking away. He was a pariah at his own celebration. Isabella stood beside him, her beautiful face a mask of confusion and fury. This was not the triumphant evening she had been promised. She had hitched her wagon to a rising star, only to watch him become a black hole. Her crimson dress, once a symbol of bold confidence, now looked garish and desperate. Clara watched as Isabella murmured something to Michael, her expression sharp and angry, before turning on her heel and stalking away, disappearing into the crowd without a backward glance. The future had just bailed. Michael was left standing utterly alone. He looked lost, his bravado stripped away, leaving only a raw, bewildered humiliation. He finally started moving, pushing his way through the crowd with a new frantic energy. He was coming for her. Just as he reached the edge of her new circle of admirers, a calm presence intervened. It was David Sterling. "Clara," Sterling said, his voice cutting cleanly through the chatter. The group parted for him like the Red Sea. "Remarkable. I meant every word I said. The Foundation is immensely grateful. We'd be honored if you would consider leading the new data integrity division we are creating based on your work." It was a job offer, a significant one, delivered in public in front of everyone. It was another signal, another layer of validation. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling," Clara said, her voice steady. "I'm very honored. I would be happy to discuss it." "Excellent," he replied with a nod. He then turned his cool, assessing gaze on Michael, who had been stopped dead in his tracks. "Michael," he said, his tone devoid of all its earlier warmth. "A word." The walk of shame from the center of the room to a secluded corner by the window was the longest of Michael's life. Clara couldn't hear what was said, but she could see it. Sterling's calm, implacable expression, Michael's frantic, gesticulating hands, his face pale and sweating. It was not a conversation between a CEO and his new SVP. It was a dressing down. After a few excruciating minutes, Sterling clapped a hand on Michael's shoulder. It was not a gesture of camaraderie. It was a gesture of dismissal. Sterling turned and walked away, rejoining the party as if nothing had happened, leaving Michael standing by the window, looking out at the city he no longer felt he was on top of. This was her chance. Her circle of admirers had begun to thin, as the party wound down. With a final polite nod, she slipped away and walked towards the exit. She wasn't going to wait for him. She wasn't going to endure a silent, toxic car ride home. She was almost at the elevator when his hand grabbed her arm. "Clara, where do you think you're going?" He hissed, his grip tight, his face contorted with a rage that was breathtaking in its arrogance. She yanked her arm free. "Home, Michael, which is more than I can say for your guest of honor." "What the hell was that?" he demanded, his voice low and trembling with fury. "You humiliated me. You and Sterling, you planned this. You made me a laughingstock on the biggest night of my life." The sheer, unadulterated narcissism of his accusation was so astounding it was almost liberating. The fear, the dread, the years of quiet, hurt it all, evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard anger. "You think I planned this?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "You think I orchestrated this? You who brought your 20-something mistress to your promotion party and introduced her as the future in front of my face, you who stood on that stage and thanked me as an afterthought, like I was the caterer. You feel humiliated. Good. Now you have a fraction of an idea of how I have felt for the past year." He was speechless, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. He had no defense, so he defaulted to attack. "That work, that foundation crap. You never told me," he stammered as if her success was a betrayal. "You never asked," she shot back. "You haven't asked me a meaningful question about my life in 5 years. You were too busy building your kingdom, Michael. Did you ever once stop to think that I might be building one of my own?" The elevator doors chimed open. She stepped inside without looking back. "This isn't over, Clara," he yelled after her, his voice echoing in the marble hall. The doors slid shut, sealing her in a cocoon of silence. As the elevator began its descent, she looked at her reflection in the polished steel doors. The pale, frightened woman from a few hours ago was gone. In her place was a woman she barely recognized, but one she was desperate to get to know. The tears finally came, but they weren't tears of sadness or humiliation. They were tears of relief, tears of rage, tears of rebirth. The gilded cage had been blown wide open. The next morning, the sun rose over a city that felt entirely different. Clara had not gone back to the Park Avenue apartment. She had checked into the Lowell Hotel, a quiet, elegant sanctuary, far from the battlefield of her old life. She had spent the night not sleeping, but thinking. The replayed events of the party were no longer a reel of humiliation, but a highlight film of her own unexpected strength. Her phone had been buzzing incessantly since dawn. Texts and missed calls from Michael, each more frantic and demanding than the last. She ignored them all. There was also an email. It was from David Sterling's executive assistant, formally inviting her to a meeting the following week to discuss the directorship of the new Data Integrity Division at the Foundation. The subject line read, "Following up on our conversation." It was real. She ordered coffee and croissants and opened her laptop. For years, her work had been her private refuge, a secret garden she tended while the rest of her world withered. Michael had dismissed it as a hobby, a little something to keep her busy. He had no idea of the scale, the complexity, the sheer importance of what she did. He never bothered to understand. His world was one of tangible assets of hostile takeovers and leveraged buyouts. Her world was one of intangible patterns of saving lives with algorithms, a concept his mind, for all its supposed brilliance, could not grasp or value. She spent the morning preparing, not for a fight with Michael, but for her future. She pulled up the files on her groundbreaking model, reviewed the initial impact reports, and began drafting a proposal for what the new division could achieve in its first 5 years. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel a surge of professional pride, unadulterated by the need to downplay it for her husband's fragile ego. Meanwhile, across town, Michael Petrov was walking into his own personal hell. He had arrived at the Sterling Crest offices early, hoping to get ahead of the gossip. It was a futile hope. The moment he stepped out of the elevator onto the polished floors of the 58th story, he felt it. The atmosphere was thick with it. The averted eyes, the sudden silences that fell as he approached the coffee station, the whispers that erupted the moment he passed. Yesterday, he was the conquering hero. Today, he was a spectacle. The story of the party had already morphed into legend, not the story of his promotion, but the story of how his wife, the quiet, mousy woman no one had ever noticed, had been publicly lauded by the CEO for work that dwarfed his own moments after he had tried to publicly install his mistress. It was a tale of hubris and comeuppance, and Wall Street loved nothing more than a good story of a titan's fall. His new office, the corner one, with the sweeping view he had coveted for years, felt less like a trophy and more like a beautifully appointed prison cell. He hadn't even finished arranging his desk when his assistant buzzed. "Mr. Sterling would like to see you in his office. Now." The walk to Sterling's office was the longest of his life, even longer than the one at the party. David Sterling sat behind a vast mahogany desk, the city skyline spread out behind him like a kingdom. He didn't invite Michael to sit. "Close the door," Sterling said, his voice flat and cold. Michael did as he was told. "I'm going to be very clear, Michael." Sterling began, steepling his fingers. "Your work on the Omnicorp deal was excellent. Your professional skills when focused are top tier. That is why you were promoted." Michael felt a flicker of hope. "Mr. Sterling, about last night." "Last night?" Sterling cut him off. His voice, dropping an octave, was a catastrophic failure of judgment. Not just personal judgment. Professional judgment. "It was a private matter," Michael protested weakly. "You made it public." Sterling counted his eyes like chips of ice. "You brought a junior employee with whom you are clearly having an inappropriate relationship to a company event and attempted to publicly humiliate your wife. My firm's name was on the invitation. That makes it my business. It speaks to a profound lack of character and discretion." Sterling leaned forward. "But that's not even the worst of it. The worst part is your utter blindness. For years you have been married to a woman of staggering intellect and accomplishment, a woman whose work, I might add, my own foundation is funding to the tune of 8 figures. And you saw none of it. You didn't know, and you didn't care to know. You saw her as an accessory, a domestic convenience." He paused, letting the words hang in the silent, sunlit office. "A man who is that blind to the value sitting in his own house cannot be trusted to assess the value of the companies we seek to acquire. Your judgment is fundamentally flawed. You see the shiny immediate thing, but you miss the deep underlying asset. You would have sold Apple in 1997 to buy a pager company." The insult was so precise, so devastating, it struck Michael like a physical blow. "Your promotion to senior vice president is on hold indefinitely," Sterling stated. "You will retain your current title. You will vacate the corner office by the end of the day. You will be reassigned to the domestic risk analysis desk, effective immediately. And you will have absolutely no contact with Isabella Rossi, who is being transferred to the Hong Kong office. Pray that she accepts the transfer." It was a complete and total neutering, a public demotion disguised as a reassignment. He was being sent to the corporate equivalent of Siberia. "This is my personal life," Michael finally exploded, his composure shattering. "This has nothing to do with my performance." "Your personal life showed me who you are," Sterling said calmly, "and I don't trust that person with the future of my company. Now get out of my office." Defeated, Michael stumbled out, the invisible eyes of the entire floor on him. His facade had not just crumbled, it had been pulverized into dust. That afternoon, Clara met with a divorce lawyer, one of the best and most ruthless in the city, recommended by a friend from her own law school days. She laid out the facts calmly and coolly. The 12 years of marriage, her financial support in the early days, his recent infidelity, his substantial income, and the public humiliation. Then she told the lawyer about her own work, her salary, and the pending offer from the Global Health and Welfare Foundation. The lawyer, a sharp woman named Jessica, listened intently. When Clara was finished, Jessica leaned back in her chair, and a slow, predatory smile spread across her face. "Oh, honey," she said, "we're not just going to divorce him. We're going to dismantle him." For Clara, it wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. It was about reclaiming the years she had invested, the parts of herself she had sacrificed. The rise had begun, and she was not going to look back. The woman in the forgettable navy dress was gone for good. The weeks that followed the party were a study in contrasts. For Michael, it was a slow, agonizing unraveling. For Clara, it was a steady, powerful ascent. Michael's life deconstructed itself with brutal efficiency. The move from the corner office to a cramped cubicle on the risk analysis desk was a daily public humiliation. His former peers and subordinates now avoided his gaze, speaking to him only when necessary, their interactions clipped and formal. The man of the hour had become a ghost haunting the hallways of his own ambition. The reassignment was a gilded cage, a place where Sterling Crest could keep him on a leash without the messiness of firing him outright. He was paid well to do mind-numbing work, a passive-aggressive torture designed to make him quit. His attempts to contact Isabella were met with a wall of silence. Her corporate email bounced back, her cell phone number was disconnected. He heard through the office grapevine that she had indeed accepted the transfer to Hong Kong. She had cut her losses and fled a sinking ship. He was no longer her ticket to the top. He was an anchor. The realization that their connection was purely transactional was a bitter pill to swallow. His social life evaporated. The power couples who had once clamored for his presence at their dinner parties now went silent. To them, he was damaged goods, a man who had not only cheated, but had done so clumsily and been publicly emasculated. It was a failure not of morals, but of strategy, which in their world was the far greater sin. He retreated to the vast, empty Park Avenue apartment. Every object, the art Clara had chosen, the books she had read, the faint scent of lemongrass that still clung to the air, was a monument to the life he had demolished. He rattled around the silent rooms, his fury and bewilderment curdling into a toxic brew of self-pity. In his mind, he was the victim. Clara had betrayed him with her secret success. Sterling had betrayed him with his high-minded principles. Isabella had betrayed him with her opportunism. He was a king, dethroned by a conspiracy of lesser beings. His calls to Clara went straight to voicemail. Her only communication came through her lawyer, Jessica, whose letters were masterpieces of polite, merciless efficiency. The initial divorce filing landed on his desk like a grenade. It was meticulous, detailed, and utterly uncompromising. Clara was not asking for a settlement. She was presenting a statement of services rendered and damages incurred. Meanwhile, Clara was building a new world. The hotel suite gave way to a bright, airy apartment in a brownstone in the West Village, a neighborhood with character and soul. It was smaller than the Park Avenue cage, but it felt infinitely larger. She filled it with books, plants, and the music she loved, things that had been crowded out of her previous life. Her meeting with David Sterling and the Foundation's board was a resounding success. She walked in, not as Michael Petrov's wife, but as Clara Clark, reverting to her maiden name. She was armed with a 20-page proposal that not only outlined the structure of the new Data Integrity Division, but also projected its potential to revolutionize 3 other areas of the Foundation's work. They didn't just offer her the directorship, they expanded its scope and increased the salary offer by 30%. Sterling, in his capacity as a board member, was professional and encouraging, treating her with the same respect he would any high-level executive. His toast at the party had opened the door, but it was Clara's brilliance and preparation that secured her place in the room. She dove into the work with a passion she hadn't felt in years. She was building a team, managing a budget, and tackling problems that mattered. Her days were filled with intense collaborative meetings with epidemiologists, logisticians, and field doctors. They listened to her. They valued her insight. She was no longer an invisible architect. She was the lead designer, and her blueprints were changing the world. Her old friends, the ones from before Michael's meteoric rise, had deemed them unsuitable for his new status, rallied around her. They celebrated her new job, helped her decorate her apartment, and reminded her of the witty, vibrant woman she had been before she'd been edited down to fit into Michael's life. One evening, about 2 months after the party, she was having dinner with her old law school friend, Chloe. "I still can't believe he called your work foundation crap," Chloe said, shaking her head as she sipped her wine. "He didn't see it because he didn't want to," Clara mused, swirling the pasta on her fork. Anything that wasn't a reflection of him or a direct contribution to his success was worthless. My career was a threat to his narrative, the one where he was the sole genius and I was the happy little homemaker. "Well, his narrative has a terrible ending," Chloe smirked. "I heard from a friend at Goldman that the story on the street is that Sterling is just keeping him around as a warning to others, a living scarecrow in a bespoke suit." Clara felt a flicker of something, not pity, but a distant clinical sadness for the man. He might have been the man she had once loved. That man was long gone, consumed by his own ego. The true turning point came during the discovery phase of the divorce. Jessica's team of forensic accountants dug into Michael's finances. They found what they were looking for, a hidden brokerage account. It wasn't just for funding his trysts with Isabella. Over the past 2 years, Michael had been engaging in high-risk off-the-books derivatives, trading using undeclared bonuses. He was gambling, trying to build a personal fortune separate from their marital assets, a getaway fund for his new life with Isabella. But his golden touch had failed him. A recent catastrophic bet on a biotech firm had wiped out not only his secret profits, but a substantial chunk of the initial capital that was legally marital property. When Jessica presented this to Michael's legal team, they folded instantly. He had engaged in the dissipation of marital assets, a cardinal sin in divorce court. He had no leverage left. The settlement was swift and brutal. To avoid charges and further professional ruin, Michael had to agree to Clara's terms. She got the entire cash value of their Park Avenue apartment, a significant portion of his legitimate investment portfolio, and a hefty alimony settlement, structured to decrease over 5 years as her own income grew, a clause Clara herself insisted upon. She didn't want his money forever. She wanted what she was owed, the seed capital for her new life. The day the divorce was finalized, Clara was in a conference room at the Foundation, presenting her division's first quarterly report to the board. She had just finished explaining how they had streamlined vaccine delivery to a remote region, a project that would come in under budget and ahead of schedule. David Sterling sat at the head of the table listening intently. As her presentation concluded, there was a round of genuine, respectful applause. Sterling caught her eye and gave a small, affirming nod. It was a gesture that meant more than any promotion or bonus. It was a recognition of her competence, her value, herself. She was Clara Clark, director, leader. She was no longer a supporting character in someone else's story. She was the hero of her own. In the end, Michael Petrov's grand promotion party wasn't a coronation. It was a reckoning. His story became a cautionary tale whispered in the boardrooms and bars of Wall Street, a stark reminder that character is a currency that can't be hedged, and that underestimating the quietest person in the room can be the most catastrophic risk of all. He lost the job, the mistress, the money, and the wife he never truly knew he had. His epic downfall wasn't caused by a market crash or a bad investment, but by his own colossal arrogance. Clara's story, however, is a powerful testament to the quiet, unshakable strength that lies within. It's a reminder that your value is not determined by someone else's recognition, and that true success isn't about the noise you make, but the impact you create. She stepped out of a gilded cage and into a world of her own making, proving that the most profound victories are the ones won, not for applause, but for purpose. If Clara's journey from being overlooked to becoming undeniable resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded of their own power. And don't forget to subscribe for more true-life stories of justice and transformation. What did you think of Michael's epic mistake? Let us know in the comments below.